Howdy. It's been a while. And since I've been out of the loop of making videos for a very hot second, I thought I'd start by making a video for purely selfish reasons and just generally talking about something I enjoy more than most other things in this game. In my just over a year of playing this game, I found 3 things that just like stand out to me the most, and I enjoy exploring topics related to these 3 things. And if you're a regular to the stream or just have been around for a while, you might already know some of them. The first and the biggest of them is the Travail trailer, and that's huge for obvious reasons, and I already have an entire video explaining that one, so go watch that after this video. The second is the moon. Mentions of the moons are absolutely everywhere, and it drives me nuts. But the third thing, however, is a newer one that only piqued my interest only after I started noticing that there was a strange pattern of things that vaguely tied back to it. And that thing is the in-game book Heart's Desire. This book holds a very strange place in my head. Like, one time I decided to read every book in the game, and immediately after reading it, the books that stood out to me were the obvious choices, Moonlit Bamboo Forest, Six Pygmies, stuff like that. But after these books marinated in my head, Heart's Desire is the one book that really stood out on top. So this video serves 2 purposes: summarizing the book for those too lazy to read it, and to be an analysis of the book as a whole. I adore this thing like a lot, and want to give you guys a little glimpse into why I think this book has a lot of pertinent information for someone who is so interested in the history of Teyvat like I am. Part 1, a summary. So let's just get the basic summary of the book out of the way for those that are too lazy or don't have the attention span to read it. Don't worry, I'm the same way. If you do want to experience the book but don't want to read it off the wiki or from in the game archive, I've linked an audiobook in the description. It's about an hour and a half. Go do your dailies or something while you listen to it. I should also add, if you have already read this book, then you could just skip to part 2. But a basic synopsis of the book is this. There's a shop that is only accessible by super obscure and obtuse means that sells artifacts from Teyvat's past. The book is titled Heart's Desire because the people that search for something from the store have a desire they want to fulfill. From wanting to forget a person that broke your heart, to wanting to propose to somebody, to trying to gain forgiveness for a murder, the shop has answers for anything your heart may desire. The owner of the shop is a woman described as having fox-like eyes over and over and over and fucking over again. And that's pretty much her entire visual description. I imagine her as rather short, kind of like a D&D halfling, but everything about her aside from the eyes is up to the mind's eye of the reader. The first volume is about Vega, a Mondstadt resident who is coming in to forget about somebody she used to love, but has since broken her heart. By the end of the story, we're learning that Vega has been coming back to the shop repeatedly for a long period of time, because the wine that the shopkeeper gave her to forget her love isn't doing the job of making her properly forget the dude. The wine only allows her to forget the pain, which her relationship wasn't painful, it just helps her forget her longing. The guy explains why he can't be with her anymore, which I'll actually talk about in a bit, and then leaves the shopkeep expressing his desire to let Vega deal with everything on her own. Volume 2 is, this time, based on a Liyue resident named Yuan. After Yuan looks at a bottle filled with a saline-like substance, which is so obviously Khaenri'ah's tears, and subsequently almost drops it when the shopkeep scares him, he talks to the shopkeep about trying to get a gift for a girl. The shopkeep gives Yuan a crystal heart, a crystal made from illuminated beasts a la the Brecken and Hextech crystals. He looks into it, which is another scene I'll talk to in a bit, and then leaves with it. The girl he was trying to seduce comes in a few days later, wanting to return the crystal. Instead of looking into it and getting a feeling of wonder and desire, or just falling in love with the dude, whatever, she instead says she feels really uneasy and comfortable when she looks into it. She returns it, and then we get a scene of the shopkeeper having her own alas poor Yorick moment. Volume 3 is where stuff gets kind of interesting. This time we're back in Mondstadt, and we get a conversation between the shopkeeper and a mysterious bandit that is the source of most of her wares. This is another topic I'll go over later. They bicker a bit, and then we jump to a scene where another pertinent character comes in, asks to exchange a blue crystal, and then we get a short, really strange reflection from the narrator. The fourth and final volume, called Hearts of Stone, is about a guy coming in with a request for something that can settle an old score, and then we get a scene switch. Another man, who is presumably asking the shopkeep about a chunk of core lapis she just sold, goes on to explain that they try to kill each other over that chunk of core lapis. The timeline of this is actually rather unclear, so I'll give you what I think happened. These 2 Liyue guys found a chunk of core lapis and decided to split the profits of selling it back at Liyue Harbor. But Guy 1 didn't trust the Raincoat guy and decided to make off with the rock. Raincoat guy noticed him and tried to cut the rope that Guy 1 was escaping on, but Guy 1 survived and sold the rock to the shopkeep. Later, Raincoat guy comes in to buy the rock again, hence the final line of the book. He takes the core lapis and you take the whole sum of money for it. Okay, the story has a lot in it, and just based off the fact that I had to dodge no less than like 3 or 4 tangents during that summary is saying a lot. So let's just kind of go down the list of things that stand out to me. Part 2 of the tangents. First of all, this book is obsessed with lunar imagery, like everything in this game. The biggest example of this is the fact that the first volume of the book is titled Moonlight, which is strange because moonlight and the moon in general is a huge motif throughout the entire book, but not just in volume 1. The first volume probably draws the subtitle Moonlight because that's how the eyes of the man are described by the shopkeep, and yes, moonlight plays an important role throughout the first volume, but it's ever present in the rest of the book, so there isn't really a specific reason to make it the title of the first volume. Like, seriously, the moon is a huge problem in this game, and it's something I really want to take a deep dive into in a later video, but for now, I just have to say that the fact that this book has an obsession with the moon is probably important, and is one of the many things spread across the lore of this game that draws very heavy attention to the moon. Aside from the massive white ball of rock in the sky, or probably not rock because it's fake, this volume has actually 2 really interesting things in it. One, the shopkeep gives Vega a wine that was brewed before the Archon War when Andreas got mad and released a blizzard on Mondstadt. I actually had to cite this book in my first timeline video. 2, after Vega leaves, the shopkeep asks the guy why he wants to leave Vega so badly, and he says it's because of a gem that he came into possession of in some manner. It's spherical, crystalline, and has unknown symbols flashing inside of it. Now, before you jump to conclusions with this, I would like to point one thing out. Yes, this is most probably a vision, but its identity is seemingly and intentionally obfuscated. What kind of drove me insane about this passage is that there are very specific things that the book decides to include, details that are unique to a vision, such as being perfectly spherical while also being crystalline, but not including important identifying details such as the color, the size, or any further dialogue between the two people. But then it also decides to include the flickering symbols detail. Nothing is consistent with what we understand a vision to be, and when I first saw this, I genuinely didn't think it was a vision and was an intentional misdirection. But now I think it is an intentional misdirection, but in a different way. I think it is a vision, but described intentionally in a way that makes you think, that can't be a vision. Because as Island XD confirmed to me, English isn't the only language where the description is like this. It's like that in Korean too. They do this, I think, because of the following few lines. The shopkeeper says that those that obtain these crystals are doomed to one day disappear from this world, which, I mean, everybody is doomed to one day disappear through death, but I don't think that's what the shopkeeper is referring to. I think there's something here that's more sinister. Here's a crackpot theory. Remember the panopticon-looking place that we saw in the Vanessa comic? What if everybody who's given a vision is sent to that prison? That place is a prison for those whose time was up. I doubt this is a brand new idea, but I think this is a new way of looking at it. We know that visions are not perfect things. If someone is stripped of their vision, they become dysfunctional amnestic messes as we see in the Inazuma questline. So what if a vision is given to those that Celestia deems as able to rise up against their rule, and if said person is shown to get a little too rebellious, is yoinked off the mortal plane, stripped of their vision, and thrown into a prison cell. They don't know who they are, they don't have any motivation to do anything, and they're doomed to die in that cell if that's the case. There's no escaping without the ambition to do so. It's the ultimate sentence. Maybe it's just me and the fact that I've been reading 1984 lately, and the idea of always being watched and possibly being erased from existence being the ultimate sentence is just fresh in my mind, but as of now, that seems unreasonably possible to me. Then the shopkeep just straight up calls the dude a heartless guy, which I find absolutely hilarious. So the second volume's specific artifact is a crystal formed from the desires of an illuminated beast. If you look into this crystal, then you can see the desire of the person or something along those lines. Something I like to point out is another motif within this book is the recurring primary artifact of each volume being a crystal of some sort. This might be a tenuous connection, but note that the first crystal we see in the book is a vision. The vision of the guy, of Vega's lover. After that, we see a lot of things like crystals, rocks, and more crystals. Just an interesting pattern I notice. After the shopkeep gives Yuan the crystal, Yuan gazes into it and gives him a very strange image. He basically sees Liyue from what I can imagine being like an aerial time-lapse view of Liyue, except instead of being like a YouTube time-lapse of LA that looks very pretty or whatever, it's a time-lapse of thousands and thousands of years. This raises the biggest question of the section, and one that might be answered by the other translations, but it might not. whose heart do you see into when you look into the crystal? Your own, the person that gave it to you, the illuminated beast in which the crystal came from? It's very unclear in how it's worded, as what the shopkeep says when explaining the crystal to Yuan is unhelpfully vague. She says, true illuminating crystals is capable of revealing the secrets of one's heart. The one in the sentence isn't really reflexive. The best guess I can come up with is that it's an obtuse reference to how the Adepti refer to themselves, like Cloud Retainer. I honestly have no clue. Whatever the case may be, Yuan takes the crystal and walks out of the store, and soon after, a woman walks in with the crystal and says that the man that gave it to her is not in her interest, and that he kind of scares her, and she takes the Tears of Khaenri'ah on her way out. So after this comes one of the most interesting scenes in the entire book. It's kind of a sort of soliloquy, alas poor Yorick style. She sits in the back of her shop looking at the crystal, kind of talking to it. I say this is kind of like that one Shakespeare soliloquy because the shopkeep is talking into the gem like it's a living person in a very poetic way. I think it's because the gem is the remains of an illuminated beast that the shopkeep once knew. If not, then this gem is really special to her, hinted at by one of her last lines in the chapter where she says, but it is truly wonderful to have this back. Another thing that this chapter clears up is the time frame in which the story takes place, which is to say there is none. The shopkeep is an extremely old being that has seen cities rise and fall and ages come and pass. This is all based off the line, but do you think it's fun taking a trip into this world once in a while, seeing what people are like nowadays? The fact that the shopkeeper can insinuate that she's been alive long enough to know that people have changed enough to be unrecognizable to how they behaved the last time she saw them allows us to safely make that assumption that she's been alive for a very long time. Sapphire is the subtitle of the third volume and continues the trend of crystals being the focal point of the story. However, this time around, the story doesn't surround characters unique to the story and instead follows two characters that already exist in Mustachian canon, Parzival and the Blue-Eyed Witch. These are two characters that a very large portion of people have never heard of, including me, because their existence is entirely reserved to mention in the books and artifact sets, but they appear over multiple different books, weapon lore, and artifact sets. They are absolutely everywhere. Parzival was an aristocrat, like genuinely high up, being the heir to Landrich, a very high-ranking aristocrat. But Parzival wasn't really a very good young aristocrat, and he was mostly known among Mondstadt for being a thief and a vigilante against his own aristocrats. This character, being a thief, is mostly the source of the shopkeeper's wares, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happens with his story, which is a topic for an entirely different video. But the other character that plays a major part in Parzival's story is his love interest, the blue-eyed, spear-wielding witch. She is Parzival's love interest, but what's most interesting about this is that the story in Heart's Desire is a continuation of a story between them in Wine and Song, a really strange catalyst I completely forgot existed. He gave a sapphire blue gem he stole to the witch because it was really close in her eye color, and then just left her with it. Next thing we know, the witch is in the shop trying to sell the item to the shopkeep. It's a really interesting tie, and it's something I'd like to make a video on in the future. Let me know if that sounds interesting. The ending continues the pattern of having a huge dump at the end of the chapter, but this time around it's even bigger. I'm just gonna read this ending that's straight up just huge. It's actually really well written and has a bunch of very important key details. Quote, lifting the blue crystal up to the moonlight, the shopkeeper gazed at it intently with her fox-like eyes with slender lines for pupils. She watched the delight as the crest of the ruling family came into view, faded out, and came back into view once more. Legends claim that peering into a pure gemstone at a specific time can reveal the past, the future, and even someone's true nature. Just as legends claim that somewhere in the world there is a field of dandelions as vast as the sea, or that once there was 3 bright moons in the night sky named Aria, Sonnet, and Canon, sisters who were parted by death in a great catastrophe, or that there was once a witch who could see death before it took place, but in the end herself died from that broken heart, as he who had stolen it from her waited in distant lands longing to see her again. One thing she knew for certain was that even if she were to abandon these objects, the legends attached to them would not disappear, and the way the stories ended could not be undone. In which case, it seemed to make sense to collect all the legends and stories she could in her shop. Okay, this is a very dense passage with lore and detail, so let's go one by one. First, legends claim that peering into a pure gemstone at a specific time can reveal the past, the future, and even someone's true nature. I'm not sure what this might be. It might just be superstition, just kind of put in there. But it falls in line with what I said before about the motif of crystals throughout the entire book. It's honestly kind of strange how common it is, and peering into a crystal to see someone's true nature kind of echoes the idea of visions being the solidified crystalline form of somebody's ambition, although not entirely a solid connection, I will admit. Next is one of the biggest connections that again tie back to the goddamn Travail trailer. Just as legends claim that somewhere in the world there is a field of dandelions as vast as the sea. Okay, I understand that dandelions are very different from the flowers we see in Travail, but please tell me that any illusion of a field of flowers that spread like a sea automatically makes you think of Travail, because it sure as hell does for me. I'm just gonna leave it at that. That's the entire connection. The third one would be a huge one if I hadn't already covered it twice before. The name of the Moon Sisters, Ariasana and Canon, who were parted by death in a great catastrophe. Nothing new here. 3 moons in the sky. They fucked up. Everything died. We're good. And finally, we have the witch who could see death before it took place, who I honestly have no idea who this might describe. Maybe it's an allusion to an artifact set, as a lot of things in the story are, but I'm not entirely familiar with artifact lore, so I have no clue. Let me know if you know who this refers to or have any theories in the comments. I would love to read up on who this might be. And finally, Volume 4 is probably the least remarkable volume of the entire book, and by far my least favorite. It's all about Cor Lapis, which we've heard plenty about from the Ajdaha quest. But the final scene I still want to look at because it's still pretty cool as a closing to my favorite book in the game. The shopkeeper asks into the blanket of rain outside if the score between the two guys is truly settled, and if they are now truly free, with no answer coming back, of course. It's very unremarkable, but it does accentuate the loneliness of the shopkeeper. She asks questions, but she never gets an answer back. She asks questions to herself and talks to objects in her shop. She isn't really that happy. The closest she has to a friend is Parzival, who comes and goes and is probably dead at this point. Honestly, this book is kind of a sleeper. It's a phenomenal read, especially for the standards of books hidden inside games, and I'd recommend people read it for themselves. The book has a lot of allusions to other artifact sets and very obscure history that a lot of people really don't know much about, and it's really cool to explore those stories. But there is one question that still lingers. Who is the shopkeep? Is she real? As we've seen with the Raiden and Scaramouche thing, eyes are an extremely important detail in this game. Ashikai was able to predict the identity of Scaramouche long before even the finale of the Inazuma quest, just by the eyes of the two characters being the same alone. And so that makes me wonder, what is the importance of her eyes? One thing that comes to my mind immediately is it's meant to identify where the shopkeeper might be from, and I have 2 ideas. One, she could be a kitsune from Inazuma if we take the simile of fox-like, literally. My other guess is that she's from Khaenri'ah. The 2 characters that we know that come from Khaenri'ah have eyes that are rather close to that description, although their eyes are much closer to that classic star shape than a fox-like slit. But I think this idea has enough value to bring up solely because of the end of Volume 3, where she says that, quote, the way the stories ended could not be undone, in which case, it seems to make sense to collect all the legends and stories that she could in her shop. I feel like this could genuinely just be her being salty about Khaenri'ah or something along those lines. It's a bit of a stretch, but I think it at least has some merit and is more interesting than her just being a kitsune. It would be really cool if we had another character from Khaenri'ah hiding right under our noses. Howdy, thanks for watching my return back to lore. A major goal of mine when it comes to making videos is to give information in an easy to digest way, so that's easy to get into, get a stepping off point for those that might not have an attention span to read paragraphs of lore for no reason. And so that involves talking about books and hopefully in the future artifact lore. So let me know in the comments what books or artifact lore I should cover in the future, or really anything for that matter. I have a few more ideas for future content, but I'm still on the hunt for major topics, so let me know what you'd be interested or would like to see me analyze. Other than that, that's all I have, so I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.